Welcome back to my sewing room. I'm Kelly and you found me here on Pick and Stitches, and today I'm going to be walking you through my Bowties and Bats quilt. This is a fun one. I decided after I got that layer cake bundle a couple weeks ago that I was going to have to do something fun and Halloweenish, and I want to just kind of walk you guys through it. So this is our basic block that we're going to be using over and over again, and I just love it because it's kind of a traditional block, but it gives off this kind of bat pattern as you look at each half of it. And in person, when you can see all of the different fabrics a little bit more, it is really striking. And you have two different opposing bats. So it has the bat with the black head, and then the other one is the gray bat, and I just think it's really a lot of fun. So stick around and I'll show you guys how we put it all together. Okay, so I started off with a layer cake and I cut background fabrics in gray and black and white to match. So first thing we're going to do is make a ton of half square triangles. And I have an entire video on 5 different ways to make half square triangles, 100% up to you on your methodology. But for me, I really like to use these triangles on a roll. It's a group from It's So Emma. I'll go ahead and link that video here so you guys can watch it if you want to look at alternative ways. But for me, this is the way that I chose to do it. So we're starting off with our layer cake fabrics. I did not starch these because I don't have enough extra room to work with. So I'm kind of getting some thread leaching all over my sewing room. It's making me a little bit crazy, but it'll be okay. And it's worth it because now we're going to get to use every last inch of this fabric. So the first thing that I'm going to do is start to pair up my colors. And what I liked to do was have 2 colors of the same wave on each block. So I used the same background black on both of my half square triangles, but I used this gray with the crows, and then I also used this gray that's just a solid. So I was just kind of mixing them in. I think some of my other blocks might give you a little bit better indicator. So on this one, I used this as my background because I had this orange fabric to hand, and I used the spiderweb black pattern as well as this star pattern. So everything had an orange as one side of the half square triangle for this block, and then I had 2 alternating colors as the main body of the bat. Okay, so I started off with a layer cake. My layer cake is this sophisticated Halloween, and then I just pulled from my stash a couple of different background fabrics. You could always just buy a second layer cake of solid or background fabrics if you wanted, but I was really trying to be as frugal as I could and use up some of the things in my stash. So now I'm going to pair them up. I want 2 of the same colorways, and I'm going to choose 2 of the same background fabrics for these 2. So then I'm just going to pair these up, put them right sides together, put my triangles on a roll, paper on top, and I'm going to pin it. Now because this is only a layer cake, it is 10 inches, so you're going to have to be very careful about where these cut lines are and that you're covering all of your fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and just pin these 2 together, and then I'll pin these 2 together, and that will give me my alternating colors for this next step. And I suggest that you kind of play with your colorways because the color placement is going to be kind of important in being able to see this pattern. I've already done quite a few blocks, so I'm going to go ahead and pin up the rest of these. So I will fast forward this for you guys, and then we'll go have a relay release on the sewing machine. And since this space is so limited, I am pinning all of these down quite heavily because I do not want the paper to shift at all. Usually, if you have a little bit of extra fabric that you're going to be trimming off anyways, if it shifts a little bit, as long as everything stays flat, you're okay. But that is not going to be the case on this one. So again, it's right sides together. And it doesn't really matter if you have your background fabric or your layer cake fabric on top, just as long as they're both facing the right direction. me go ahead and mix these with a white just to keep some variety, but you could always use the same background fabric for the whole quilt if you wanted. Okay, now that I've got all my stacks together, we'll head over to the machine and I'll show you how we sew these on. Okay, so now we're over to the machine. I'm going to drop my stitch length to like a 1.25-ish. And if you look at your triangles on a roll, there are arrows that will tell you exactly how to sew the whole thing without stopping. I find that I like to just sew a straight line corner to corner, cut the thread, do the other side in parallel, and then rotate my piece. 100% up to you. As long as you sew on all these dotted lines, you will be just fine. Okay, so after I've got all 4 sides sewn, I always like to, or 4 lengths run, I'm going to flip it over and just make sure I didn't miss anything. That bobbin thread shows up really well on that black, so it's easy to see. And then we'll just get into a bit of a marathon over here and get going. Okay, so now we're going to cut these apart just like we would any triangle on a roll. So I'm going to start by trimming up my edges all the way around the outside, and then I'm going to do my solid black lines that are not in the seam next, because these are what are going to determine the size of your block, where you sewed your line and these outside ones. Okay, now everything else that we still have to cut is already in a seam allowance. So I want to stack these up, but not alternating. I want them to face the same way, and then I'm just going to cut them 2 at a time. But definitely make sure your triangles are going the same way, because you'd hate to ruin half your batch. Okay, and since we dropped that stitch length, the paper should just come right off. Nice and easy. Then we'll take these over to the pressing station and we will press all of them one direction. I tinkered in this pattern with pressing open and with just pressing to the dark side. And honestly, everything is just so much easier if it nests. And I like to sew that way better, so I wrote the pattern to have nesting seams. But if you are a press it open kind of person, that's totally fine as well. So I will go ahead and cut the rest of these and catch you guys back here in a little bit. Okay, so now we've got all of our half square triangles ready. I'm just going to set the seams. And I like to do this kind of all the way across my ironing board when I've got so many that I'm going to make. It's just a little bit easier. Okay, so I'm going to just press all of these to the dark side all at once. And then I will trim off the dog ears and we'll check our measurement. So all of your half square triangles should be 4.5 inches at this point. And then I'm just going to trip off all of our little dog ears. And we're ready to start putting our block together. So now we're going to put together our first part of the block, and I'm going to use 2 of the same color wave, different pattern, and they need to have the same outside or background fabric. Now you can totally play with this. I made some with all 4 being the exact same fabric. I made some where they had all different fabrics, so it just depends on how scrappy it is that you want your pattern to come together. But I'm going to do my first gray pattern with the points towards the middle and my second gray pattern with the points towards the outside. So if you've been quilting for a little while, you'll recognize that. It's a pattern called Broken Dishes. So I'm going to do this for everything in this color wave. And I've got a couple other examples here of some of the ones where I made it all with the same fabric. And I like that. I just feel like the back kind of disappears a little bit more. So we're just going to snip this one I missed. Okay, we're just going to head over to the machine and we're going to sew these 2 together and these 2 together. And then I'm going to press them opposite, so it doesn't matter which one goes which direction. You just want to press one to the right and one to the left. So we're just going to flip these together and they will nest because we pressed both of them towards the darker fabric. Put my stitch length back to normal. And I'm going to flip this one over and do the same thing. And so you want to have your background fabrics the same and then 2 of the same colorway but maybe different patterns, so it'll stand out a little bit better. All right, so I do kind of like to chain piece these so that I'm, rolling through them a little bit faster. So I'm going to go ahead and build out my other ones. So I'm doing these 2 the same where the crow pattern is towards the middle and the next 2, then I'll go ahead and put this floral pattern towards the middle just to have a little bit more variety. Okay, so we'll head back over to the pressing station and I'll press these open. Okay, so now I've got the florals in the center. You don't have to do that. It's just a little bit more variety in my blocks, that's all. The bird block, I ended up with all my crows on this one. Probably could have planned that a little bit better. Oh well. Okay, so now we'll take them over and press them. Okay, so these are pretty easy and straightforward to press. I just keep them all chain pieced together, and then I just alternate the blocks so that I don't have to think about, am I pressing to the right or am I pressing to the left? So I set my seams, and then whatever way I flip it open, that's the side I'm going to press to. And then on this one, since I'm flipping it this way, it means I will automatically be opposite. And then I will go ahead and cut my 2 blocks apart so that it's not confusing, but I'm keeping the pieces together that go in the same block. Okay, let's head back over to the machine and we will sew the rest of this broken dishes block. Okay, so I've just set them all together, stacked up on my design board, one right after the other, so I know I can just grab them, the top 2, put them together. My seams are going to nest, and off we go. Okay, now we'll just go back over to the pressing station and I'm going to press all of these to one side. Doesn't matter which side, whatever side you like. Okay, so then I'm going to press my seams. Oops, not that way. And then just press it open and set it under the clapper for just a minute. And we'll do that for all of our blocks. Okay, so now your block should look something like this. It's a standard broken dishes block. You've got your same background colors and then 2 fabrics that are in a similar color wave. And then we're going to do the fun part. So this is kind of like a disappearing 4 patch at this point, or disappearing 9 patch. We're going to cut this block into multiple pieces so that we can end up with our bat pattern. So the first cut that I'm going to make is over here on the edge. I'm going to cut this row to be 2 3/4 of an inch. And I did tinker with it. If you would prefer for your bats to look more like cats, you certainly can do that. You just need to cut that first section to 3 inches instead of 2 3/4. And it makes the ears a bit larger and it looks a lot like a cat to me. But my daughter is so into Halloween and she wanted a bat. So I cut that first one at 2 3/4 and then I rotated it and I'm cutting 2 3/4 on every side all the way around. And what that's going to do is leave me with 2 3/4, 3 inches, 2 3/4. And on the other direction, it's going to do exactly the same thing. So that's what's going to give your bat his shape of his head. If you cut them all to be 2 1/2 inches, it's going to look more like a square. So now, as we kind of pull these apart, you can see that our little half square triangles are kind of already starting to disappear. So what we're going to do is just rotate these 4 pieces. Everything else is going to stay exactly where it is. Now, if you have a non-directional print, it's really easy. You're just going to flip it over. That's all you have to do to make this block. And then when we put it back together, it's going to make this be your bat head across the top. So you've got your ear, the top of his head, and his wings. If you have a directional print though, and it gets messed up, like here I've got a bird right side up and here I've got birds upside down. This is where it was when I cut it. The other thing you could do is just switch them right to left. So you could take this one and swap it. So now all my directional prints are still the same way, and do the same thing on this side. The only real difference here is these seams are not going to nest anymore because we didn't rotate it. So that's the only difference if you've got a directional print. But if you don't have a directional print, just rotate the block, and that way everything will nest really nicely for you. So then we'll take this over to the machine. We're going to sew it down, whatever your methodology is to get that attached. I usually like to start with this piece and attach it to this one, and I'm going to do these two following it, and then I'll pull it back through, and then I'll flip this one open, and then I'm going to attach those two. And that's how I get my 9 pieces all together pretty quickly. So let's sew it over to the machine. Okay, so now we'll just sew these together. So I start with that top middle, and I'll sew it to the top left. I'm still using that same scant quarter that I always use. What? Okay. And then I'm going to take my middle piece and sew it to the left piece. And these seams, if you didn't have a directional print, will nest really easily. And then we'll take the bottom middle and the bottom left, flip them together, and sew them on. So what was on top as I pulled it through was actually this middle row. So I'm going to break my thread, pull it back through. So this first one was my middle top row. So when I flip it open, then I'm just going to grab this right hand one and flip it on top. And they're still attached because I was chaining them, that way they don't get turned around. And then these two will nest really well, nice and easy. And then we attach that last piece on. Okay, so when we take this over to the pressing station to press, we're going to press this middle row towards the middle, and the other two are going to press to the outside. Okay, so we've got our pieces all ready to go. I'm just going to fold this over the top and stitch it on, and we'll stitch it down. And then I just open it up, make sure I like where everything is, and then I'm going to come to the other side, and those seams will again nest, and off we go. All right, let's go press it open and take a look at our block.
All right, so now we've got all of our bats sewn, and this is going to be quite a large quilt. I wanted to use up as much of the fabric from that layer cake as we could. So this is 9 by 9, which is going to use 81 of your squares, which leaves you with 3 extras. So you could make those into a pillow or a table runner. I think you could also make this like almost a half-size quilt and get 2 out of it if you wanted to have 2. But I have the scrap bins that are overflowing in my sewing room, so I was like, how can I use every last bit of this and get it moved right along through? So that's my plan. We've got 9 by 9. Now I'm going to go through just like normal. I'm going to take this top row from here to here, and I'm going to add my sashing strips between each piece, and then I'm going to sew that top row all together. I'm not going to put this outside piece on, and I'm not going to put this outside piece on, but everything else is going to have a little strip of sashing between it.
All right, so now I have all 72 of our between the sashings sewn in, and our entire row is sewn together. The next thing we're going to do is add the sashing between each row. We're not going to do the top or the very bottom, just the between the rows for right now. Now, if you followed the pattern exactly and you have exactly 1/4 of an inch seam, you're going to make your pieces 75 inches long. However, there are 16 seams across here. So if your seam is not exactly 1/4 of an inch every single time, if you sew a scant quarter, then your piece might be just a tad longer. So I recommend that you measure that before you cut those down, just in case, your little 1/16 of an inch might add up and then you'd be too short on the outside edges. But for right now, I'm going to come back through. I'm going to sew these two together, and then these two together, and then these two together, and then these three together, and then I'll get my whole entire sandwich together. But we're not doing the top row or the bottom row just yet, just the middle pieces. Okay, guys, now all of our sashing is in place. All we have left are our borders. So the first thing I'm going to do is add my 2 border strips to the side, and then I'm going to add my 2 border strips to the top. We are ready to quilt it and bind it. I hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial. It has been fun for me to share our family's love of Halloween and all things trick-or-treat and bats and sillies and all the good stuff. All right, that's everything on this Bowties and Bats quilt. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, there will be a couple of different sizes. You can choose to make yours out of the entire layer cake like this one. That's going to be 78 by 78, or you could choose to break it into 2 separate quilts and make each one is 52 by 61, I believe. So if you want more details than what is provided here in the video, I'll have a link to a PDF here for you guys as well. But you'll probably pull everything you need straight out of the video. I love getting to share these different fun Halloween seasonal kind of excitement in our family and our household with you all. If you like watching these tutorials or any of my unboxing videos, definitely hit that like and subscribe button. It helps me out a ton. And if you're on the private Facebook group, I'd love to see what you guys are making with this pattern. Until then, I will see you guys all next time.